We ready to go?
Ready to go.
Excellent. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Wonky Weekly.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And I'm Sid Solomon. And like Fozzie Bear says, Wonka, Wonka, Wonky.
Close.
I think close is very generous. Hi, Rashaan.
Hi, Sid.
How are you today?
I'm good. Mostly good. My feet have been bleeding for the last day because I've been tap dancing and doing toe stands for 6-hour rehearsal.
Toe stands?
Yeah.
Is a toe stands? Yeah, I'm not a dancer. Are toe stands like being on point, but in tap shoes?
Sure. Yeah. Except we're making sounds. So we're literally like jabbing our feet into the floor, but it's similar. It's the same kind of pain, I imagine. Like, that's why I don't understand what ballet dancers do day after day.
I can only imagine. We should do an entire episode. Rashaan, explain dance things to Sid like he's an idiot.
Oh, God.
Because he is. That'd be fun. And as I showed Rashaan before we started recording, I have a fingernail that finally fell off, which is work related. I'm fine. Don't worry, folks. I'll make it. It's going to be okay. So, Rashaan, today we're going to be talking about an interesting topic. I think a fun topic. What are we talking about today?
Entry to equity, how you get into our union.
How you get into our union, how you join our union. So this is an area in which there has been some change recently. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to talk about how things have been, how they have changed within the last, say, 5 to 10 years, and how they've changed within the last year. Let's start with this. Rashaan, how and when did you join Actors Equity Association?
I joined in 2005, actually April 20th. 420 is my anniversary for Actors Equity Association.
It was just your anniversary.
Yeah, just my anniversary. I got the email. I filled out the survey. If you get that email, fill out the survey because now they ask some really great questions. I joined in 2005, April 20th, 2005 at Westchester Broadway, a theater that actually doesn't exist anymore. I joined by contract. And I joined in kind of not the way that everyone joins on contract. I was non-equity in the show until a certain point, and then I became equity after a certain point to finish the run. And I will tell you, it felt very different to be a non-equity actor in that cast and then to be an equity actor in that cast. It's like night and day. Like the next week felt different. And my paycheck looked different. Who I could call looked different. So it was really awesome feeling the change while I was working. But my first equity contract was actually not the one where I took my card. Earlier the same year, I did an equity show where I worked on contract, but I did not take my card because I wasn't ready.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So I want to go back. First of all, what was the show at Westchester Broadway Theater?
Aida.
And were you on chorus contract?
I was on a chorus contract, yeah.
And what contract were they using at the time? Do you remember?
Dinner theater, but they have their own dinner theater contract. That's not the National Dinner Theater contract.
So you said that during the run of Aida, when you were not working an equity contract up until the point at which you were. And that's interesting. I've heard of that happening before. I did a show at Riverside Theater in Vero Beach once, and they were the show coming in after hours was a production of Hello, Dolly, and they were doing the same thing on that show. There were a handful of people who were starting the show without union contracts, and then during the course of that run, they would be put on union contracts and join the union. So you talked about how it felt different. Was it more about how you felt now that you were a member of a union? Was it more about what you now had access to and power to do now that you were working on a union contract? Was it a little bit of both? Talk more about that difference.
Definitely a little bit of both. We had this as actors and stage managers. We have this idea that joining the union means we've made it to being a professional, right? And so that was the moment at which I embodied that thing. I was like, finally, I've made it as a professional, even though, you know what, I was a professional before then. But I don't know if we're ready to define ourselves that way back in 2005. The equity card was a benchmark for professionalism. And so I took that on. But also, Westchester Broadway had different treatment between the equity cast and the non-equity cast. So
Mm.
like there were times where I would still be on stage rehearsing or doing things because of the fact that I don't necessarily have the same stipulations that the equity cast had. I understudied Merab, and I remember in understudy rehearsals before I was equity, it felt like things could get a little longer or my breaks could disappear a little bit. But then all of a sudden it was, well, this is your five, Rashaan, take it. Where so they treat the equity cast, or they treated the equity cast a little differently than they treated the non-equity cast. And so I felt it in that way too. It was like it was a real thing where I was gaining time, and I was gaining, it felt like, and I'll tell you, it felt like I was being respected all of a sudden. And
Mm.
I don't think I was disrespected as a non-equity actor, but I felt respected all of a sudden. So that was a big difference.
Let me ask you this. So you talked about how you had worked an equity contract before this, and you chose not to join the union with that contract. How would you describe the difference between how you felt working a union contract, having the protections of the union contract without being a member, versus how you then felt at Westchester Broadway, both being on the contract and being a member?
Well, the show where I did not take my card had no non-pros in it. So
Mm.
everyone, and we should actually stop using the word non-pro. That's
Agreed.
we should stop using that word. There were no non-equity contracts. There were non-equity actors. There were actually two of us working on contract. I think the only people that would know that would have been the producers and maybe my company manager. So I benefited 100% as an equity member, even though I was not.
You make a very good point about the use of the term non-professional, and let's hit that real quick, because non-professional is a contractual term that you will find in equity contracts, and I'm with you. We should denormalize that language, because I think it doesn't actually comport with real life, with the facts. If you look at an equity agreement that has a non-professionals section, it typically outlines the ways in which, under the terms of that collective bargaining agreement, the employer is allowed to hire people without equity contracts. They're, what we will sometimes call like a ratio theater, like a theater that has an agreement that 75% of their cast needs to be on an equity contract, which means that 25% are allowed to be hired without an equity contract. And equities contracts historically have referred to those people without equity contracts as non-professionals. And almost always, we know that those people working without those union contracts and working without those union protections, they are professionals. They just don't happen to be members of our union yet. And I imagine we're going to come back to that later in this episode. I'm also really glad that you talked about working a contract without joining, because I did not know until today that we had that in common. I also worked an equity contract, one equity contract without joining the union. Which was back in 2008. I also didn't realize you joined so much earlier than I did. I joined equity in 2010.
Huh.
But I joined, so I worked my first equity contract in 2008 at a also now non-existent theater called Florida Stage, which was in Palm Beach County. It was a LORT theater. I was working on a LORT contract. I was still living in Minneapolis and St. Paul at the time. And Florida Stage specialized in new plays, and a really wonderful director named Michael Bigelow Dixon, who was working at the Playwright Center in Minneapolis at the time, was directing this show. And he cast most of the show with Minneapolis St. Paul actors. And I auditioned and I booked it. And it was a rare out-of-town gig for an actor living in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And when they first offered me the job, they offered it to me. I wasn't an equity member yet. And they offered it to me as a non-union contract. They offered it to me as a non-pro. And I took it, and the terms were fine, and I was excited to go do it. And then before I started work, I heard from the employer, and they said, "Oh, by the way, we need to put you on an equity contract. Sorry about that." And I was like, this makes it different for me. I'm not actually sure that I'm ready to join. And they said, "Oh, no, don't worry. You don't need to join if you don't want to. You can just work the contract," which I didn't know at the time. And so that's what I did. And I, because I was living in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I was 23, 24 at the time. And I had every intention of staying in the Twin Cities. I was planning on staying there for a very long time. And given the theaters in that town and the various contracts that they worked, I did not think I was at a place in my career where joining equity would allow me to continue working and continuing to build my resume to a point where I would be employable moving forward. It obviously wasn't that I didn't want to eventually join the union, but I didn't want to join too soon based on the economic realities of the market that I was in. So I did the show, I worked the contract, I came back, and then I ended up joining 2 years later in 2010 when I was hired by the Acting Company, which is a touring classical repertory theater based out of New York City. They were at the time co-producing with the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, which is where I went to school, the Guthrie Theater's BFA program. And so I auditioned in Minneapolis. They hired me. It was on an LOA referenced to Lort. So I joined. So that's when I joined. I joined in 2010. When I took that contract, I still had every intention of staying in Minneapolis and St. Paul and coming back from that whole year of experience and coming back. And then that didn't happen. My life changed. The relationship that I was in ended, and the next relationship that I would end up in and that would lead to my marriage began, all during the course of that tour. And then I ended up doing a second year with the Acting Company, and then fully sort of relocating officially to New York, really in 2012. But we both joined, I think, in the way that the majority of equity members have historically joined the union, with a contract. As far back as I think I've ever known or understood, one of the ways to become eligible to join Actors Equity is to be given an equity contract by an employer. And once you have that contract, you become eligible. So do you remember, Rashaan, do you remember what the actual process of joining was like? Because you joined at a theater, not in New York City, but just north of New York City. What do you remember about the actual process of joining?
Oh, I actually have a photo of myself, Drew Franklin, and Logan Kessler signing our contracts at the theater. We all joined the same day, and they took us upstairs. We signed a a copy of the document, but back then that's still when it was the carbon copies. So it was like one page, but 3 pages. It was a white one, a yellow one, and a pink one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You sign the document that says you are now a member of Actors Equity Association. And I paid my dues right away. I paid my initiation and my dues right away. I think because I I was excited. I was like, oh my God. But I remember I had to call because I did have a problem. I don't remember what the problem was. And so I would really wish I could remember what it was. But I spoke to a staff member who there's no possible way I'm going to remember which staff member it was, who told me, who actually like guided me. I asked a bunch of questions about equity that day, and I got a lot of answers. And I will say that probably was my only interaction with equity staff until the year that I ran to be a counselor. So I think there's like a 12-year gap where I had nothing to do with equity at all. I mean, of course, I worked, but I never bothered to learn anything about governance. I never bothered to do anything that like required me to be a good equity member. I just kind of floated along until I was pissed off about something, and then I ended up running and learning every single possible thing I could possibly learn about equity.
You are not going to be surprised at all about my story of actually like joining the union. I'm going to watch your face as I tell this. So I joined with the Acting Company. We began work here in New York. So we were rehearsing the first of our two shows, Romeo and Juliet, at New 42nd Street Studios. So for anybody who doesn't live in New York City, those studios are right on 42nd Street, just off of Broadway, between Broadway and 8th Avenue. Like, yeah. So at the top of rehearsal, they handed out our contracts. I didn't have an agent at the time. You know, I had negotiated the terms myself, but like they handed me my equity contract. We all signed our equity contracts. I don't think we had carbon copies at that point in 2010, but like, you know, I think I just had 5 paper copies. And during my lunch break on that first day of rehearsal, I took my contract. I walked to 46th Street. to the membership desk. I like asked the person in the lobby, like, where's the equity membership department? I went up to the 14th floor, and I walked up to the membership desk, and I waited my turn, and I got up to the desk, and I put it down on the desk, and I said, I have a contract. I'd like to join the union. And I also don't remember who it was who would have been at the desk, but they smiled just the funniest smile. They're like, "You, sir, are a nerd."
Oh yeah.
But I was very excited. I was kind of like I was kind of emotional about it. Like, I come from a union family. Like, I was joining a union. It had always been a very big deal to me knowing that I would join equity. And I honestly I thought I would have joined sooner. And just the way that my career sort of unfolded in the Twin Cities, it didn't happen until then. But I really loved sort of the agency of getting to walk up to the desk and sort of put it down. I will say, I don't know if you had this experience. I was worried that my name might not be available, and was like, keeping my fingers crossed and wondering what I might do if I had to pivot to picking an equity name right then. Rashaan, did you have any concern that your preferred equity name might not be available?
Fun little fact. The reason why my Roman numeral 2 is there is because my grandfather is an equity member. So I am the second of him. So I am not my father's. That's why I'm the second. I'm not a junior.
How did I not know that?
Yeah, so that's why sometimes when people go Rashaan James, I'm like, nope, that's my grandfather. So yeah, Rashaan James II is me.
My mind is absolutely blown. How am I just? Are we going to do like an entire episode on like your family history with equity? I didn't know that you had what? Explain.
He is the only member of Actors Equity. He did like one thing back in the, I think, 70s, and joined Equity. He was a voiceover actor, so he did a ton of voiceover work. And he did one theater gig, and he became an Equity member, and he took the name. So I cannot be Rashaan James in the union. That is why I'm the second.
I want to go back and watch what my face just looked like when that happened. Because anybody who's watching, I'm not that good an actor. Whatever response just came out of me, I had no idea that was the case. All right, so you were confident that there was a Rashaan James already, but that Rashaan James II would do. My name is Sid Solomon. Sydney Solomon, fully. I assume there might be a decent chance there was some Borscht Belt performer from like the 30s or 40s who or like was still alive. I don't know. So I had options, but I was very much hoping that Sid Solomon would not be taken.
I need to know what these options are.
Well, I mean, like, my middle name is Lewis, so I could have been Sid Lewis Solomon. I could have been Sydney Lewis Solomon. I could have been. I don't know if there had been a Sid Solomon or Sydney Solomon. I don't know if a middle initial by itself would have done it. I could have gone by SL. I could have gone Sid Lewis or Sydney Lewis. Like, all of these things were floating around in my 26-year-old head. Like, what would I do? Like, what would I pick? What I have to pick today? But of course, it was fine. I'm Sid Solomon.
Probably explain what we're talking about.
Sure. So for anybody who doesn't know, one of the protections that you get as an equity member is that only one person can have a name as a member of the union. So I'm trying to think of famous examples like Philip Seymour Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman, his union name, both in SAG-AFTRA and Actors Equity, was Philip Seymour Hoffman because there was already a Philip Hoffman in the union. Fun little trivia fact: Philip Hoffman, a very accomplished actor, was in the original company of Into the Woods on Broadway. So I didn't know Philip Seymour Hoffman, but like, by all accounts, he went by Phil, like he was Phil Hoffman. But because the union says only one person will have each name, he had to pick something else. And so if there had been a Sid Solomon or a Sydney Solomon already in the union staff would have asked me to pick another name or another version of my own name to ensure that there was clarity between who I am and who somebody else is. So it is a benefit of membership, is that only one person can have the name that you have. There cannot now be another Rashaan James II who marches in, and they will have to pick something else.
Thank God.
I only want one. One is plenty for me. All right. So This is the most common way that people have historically joined equity. They are given a contract by an employer. An employer says, I would like to hire you. I'd like to hire you using a union contract. You are not currently a member of the union, but now that you are being hired with this contract, you are now eligible to join the union. The choice is yours. And both Rashaan and I made a choice on our first contracts that at that point for both of us, it was not the right choice for us to join the union then. So we declined to join on our first contracts. And then on our second contracts, we said, now is the right time. And so there we go. So that is one of the 3 historical ways that people have been able to join Actors Equity. What should we talk about next? Pick your favorite second historical option, Rashaan.
Sister union.
Sister unions. All right. So we did this with Ruth Kramer, and I think she'll never forgive me for putting her on the spot with this in our election procedures episode. Rashaan, I'm going to try it with you. Can you name all of Equity's sister unions?
AGMA, AGVA, SAG-AFTRA, GIA.
GIA. All right. So that's AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists, AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists, SAG-AFTRA, Screen Actors Guild, and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, and GIA, my personal favorite sister union, which is the Guild of Italian American Actors. I was so excited about it. I think I just hit my microphone. Sorry.
Are you a member of GIA?
Not yet. Like, I wanted to be a present to myself. I'm so excited about joining. And for anybody who doesn't know, I am part Italian. My mother's maiden name was Agostini. I come from an Italian family. So anyway, but back on the subject. So Rashaan, can you talk a little bit about how a person can join Equity via a sister union?
Yeah, so if you are a member of a sister union, any of the 4 that we've mentioned, especially GIA, you can buy your way into the union by saying, I am a member of one of these unions. I would like to pay to be inside of Actors Equity Association and be a member. I actually have one friend who did this. They were a member, they were a Rockette for 2 years. And they said, you know what? I want to be in Equity because I don't want to be at chorus calls anymore and have to wait. So the problem was she was EMC, and there's no distinction between an EMC and a non-equity dancer in a chorus call. So she would have to wait and get on the list in like in the olden days when we were in person. And she's like, I would never get seen. And I've been a Rockette for this many years, and I know that if I get seen, I will get a job and I want to do theater. So she joined, and sure enough, like she's like the crazy example, because her first audition as an Equity member, where she was able to go and sign up on the second floor. Remember that?
I do.
Go and sign up on the second floor. That was the show that she booked, because she had gone through the process of becoming an Equity member that gave her access to the audition. And because she had access to the audition, she was able to book a job, which is insane. But it's also that's what we're supposed to be doing. So I love it.
You know someone else who joined Equity via a sister union. I don't know if you know this. Our old friend Melissa Robinette.
Oh, I don't know that.
Former chorus counselor, former Eastern Regional Vice President, former first Vice President of the union. Mel Robb was a member of AGVA, the American Guild of Variety Artists. For anybody who doesn't know Melissa, she comes from a circus family. And so she was a member of AGVA first. 2 things I'll add real quick. One, I know that there are some rules in place about how long you need to have been a member of one of our sister unions in order to use that for eligibility to join. As well as in some cases, there are requirements about needing to have worked a contract with that union that you're a member of. But those rules I have always found to be quite complex. In terms of not only how many contracts you need to have worked, but what kinds of contracts, and that gets into the ways in which other unions deal with their contracts, of which I am not an expert at all. So if you have specific questions about how you might be eligible to join Equity via a sister union, that is a good question for Equity's membership department. And you can always reach them by calling Actors Equity at 212-869-8530. Did I get that right? I think I did.
Yeah, or membership at actorsequity.org.
Or membership at actorsequity.org. I will also say this, Rashaan. I know people who feel different ways about this, but I tend to agree with folks who do not love the use of the term buying into the union, specifically when it comes to sister union eligibility. People have made the argument to me, which again I find persuasive, that it feels in some ways like it diminishes sister union membership as a route, as if it is a lesser route that you need to, that it's a financial thing, that like, because of this, I'm going to buy in. And also, frankly, because you are paying no more or less money to join via a sister union than you are through any of the other various routes. Everybody has to buy into the union because we have initiation fees and dues. So it is a common parlance. And I know, again, Mel Robb, I hope she's watching. Hi, Mel. Mel uses that expression. I've heard her use that expression a lot. I bought my way into the union, and she does not use it in any kind of pejorative way. But it has been raised to me by enough people who are like, why do we say buying in for these people, but not for those people? That it's, it's a thing. All right. So we've covered joining via a contract. We have covered joining via a sister union, including my favorite sister union, the Guild of Italian American Actors. And the third traditional way is
through the EMC program.
Through the EMC program, the Equity Membership Candidate Program, or Candidacy Program. I can never remember. I, of all people, should know, but EMC. You want to talk about the EMC program? Were you ever an EMC, Rashaan?
No, I was never an EMC. I never got a single week for EMC. No. So do you want to talk about the old way and then we'll talk about the new way?
Well, let's talk about the old way and then the new way. And since you weren't a member and since you weren't an EMC, and I was, I'll cover this very quickly. So the Equity Membership Candidate Program is designed to allow stage managers and actors to build essentially credit towards eligibility in joining the union in a way that is not by getting an equity contract or by being a member of a sister union. And essentially the program was built to say, if you work at equity theaters, so theaters that have collective bargaining agreements with the union, and you work for them as we mentioned before, non-professionals. So if you work enough at equity theaters, but without being given an equity contract, you can build up essentially credit towards becoming eligible. It was for a very long time that the amount of credit you needed to build up was 50 weeks worth of work. Once you had worked for 50 weeks as a non-professional, as a person without an equity contract, as a stage manager or actor at a theater that was a member of the EMC program, that participated in the EMC program. So again, that is theaters that have a CBA with equity, that had a non-pro ratio in their agreement, and that equity had deemed worthy for whatever reasons of being qualified to convey EMC credit. That if you worked for 50 weeks, you could then say to the union, I've worked for 50 flippin' weeks without an equity contract for equity theaters. Surely I must be qualified to join equity at this point. And then once you worked your 50 weeks, you could join the union and you could go up to the membership desk and say, I've got 50 weeks, I can join. I joined the EMC program in 2006. Right after college, I did a year-long apprenticeship at the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis. It was, in fact, a 47-week job, but smartly, because I think both Children's Theater and equity and all of us participating in the apprenticeship understood that that apprenticeship was not necessarily the kind of thing that would put us in a position where we wanted to be 47 out of 50 weeks deep into the EMC program. They worked out an agreement with equity where a full year's worth of participation in the EMC program would give you something like 20 or 25 weeks of credit. And that was seen as a good thing by everybody. We should also mention that part of the deal with the EMC program is if you join it, first of all, you pay an initiation fee into that program. It used to be $100. It was $100 when I joined. with the understanding that that $100 that you're paying to join the EMC program would eventually be credited towards your initiation fee to join the union. So it's money if you are planning to join the union eventually, it's money you would have spent anyway. So there you go. But also, by joining the EMC program, you agreed that once you hit that 50-week threshold, that you would not work at any equity theater without an equity contract. Fast forward, so that's 2006 when I became an EMC. 50 weeks was the hard and fast eligibility point. Fast forward to about 2016, I want to say, I had been on council for a year. And I kept hearing from members that we had a lot of people who wanted to be members, who were having trouble securing an equity contract, but who had 28, 32, 36 EMC points and are like, please let me join. I want to join your union. And given the shrinking size of rehearsal processes and the short length of runs at so many theaters, getting to 50 weeks was starting to feel like an insurmountable hurdle. So back in 2016, I brought a proposal to the Entry to Equity Committee saying, hey, what if we found a way that people could join the union with fewer weeks if they wanted to? And through about a year's worth of committee work, we created the now currently existing two-phase system of the EMC program, where once you hit 25 weeks, you can choose to join the union through the EMC program. You are still allowed to wait all the way to 50 weeks if you want. But that was an intended solution to the problem of we've got people who want to join. The current pathways are not making them eligible to join. And that's the EMC program in a nutshell as it currently exists. Anything I didn't cover in there, Rashaan, that you think is worth pointing out?
No, that's really great.
Okay. And that brings us as a really fantastic segue to open access, which is the newest and I think most important pathway to joining equity. And to be very transparent, I think highlights a big thing that I missed back in 2016 when I helped create this new two-tiered system of the EMC program. And I'm still proud of that as an accomplishment, but I wasn't thinking big enough. It was a really good example of trying to fix a problem by staying within the existing structures rather than thinking bigger and more holistically and saying, what if you throw out the existing structures?
Right.
So let's talk about open access. This is something that has happened while you have been on council, Rashaan, and I have not. So what is open access? Explain it as best you can.
Yeah, so open access is relatively new, but it is happening. And I want to say before we talk about open access, it's changing and it's evolving as it goes on. So what I'm going to talk about is like what it is right now. The future plans for open access, like even like the 5-year plan for open access still is not quite in place yet. Council, working groups, and our diversity and inclusion strategist, who is Bliss Griffin, is really, really still like knee deep in this work. What we found is if you go into the reports about who gets hired, there is an exclusion of human beings who cannot get hired. So that means they cannot join through one of these ways. And that means they cannot get in a sister union because that's also the same problem. They cannot work on a contract because they're not being hired, and they cannot get weeks because they're not being hired as non-pros, non-equity members. But like catching ourselves and realizing that that's like kind of a dirty word is really good. And I like that people see me tripping over it too. So there was a program, open access, was created to find a pathway, a new pathway to allow these people to have access to our union. So what open access does is it says, if you've worked in theater as a professional, you are able to join our union, period. So we had something called the D&I retrofit, which was the diversity and inclusion retrofit that happened in 2019. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it was 2019. That told the union as an institution that we needed to be better when it came to marginalized communities and how they join in access. So the particulars are to make sure that people, hashtag change the stage, who haven't had access do now have
I
access.
mean, at this point, essentially, what we know right now is that if you've worked professionally, and if you can prove it, which is a relatively simple thing, you can currently join. And that as of right now is slated to exist through May of 2023. And as you said, beyond that, the union is currently working on what open access will mean past 2023.
Right.
And I think we can probably safely say we're not going back to the old system as it used to exist. So it's not a question of, at least I hope, I don't think it's a question of this is a period of open access that will close, but rather this is a first step in the direction of more equitable access to joining the union.
Great. So if you are an EMC or a former member, or you have worked in an equity theater, you might already know what you need for eligibility to join equity. If you don't, and you've worked worked professionally as a stage manager actor, you'll just have to provide proof that you've worked. And usually what you can do is just proof of payment, a pay stub, a W-2, a 1099. You fill out the application. It's a $600 down payment towards the initiation fee.
Yes.
And then you go forward. And I actually believe that this round of open access will close May 1st, 2023. Yes,
correct.
Ooh,
You're crushing it.
That's wonky of me. I like having that date in my head. And we will be developing the rest as we go. So we are in phase 1 of open access. So if you are one of those people who has worked professionally as a stage manager or actor here in the US, that's actually a stipulation that it has to be here in the US. You can go to the website. I would just go to the front-facing actorsequity.org page, join equity, and you can see exactly how to join through open access.
And I will put it on the screen right here. But in terms of open access, specifically, the URL you want to go to is actorsequity.org/join/open access. And again, I think I've gotten pretty slick with this stuff. I'll put it right there underneath us. I want to go back for a second just to reiterate. When we talked about joining with a contract, I said this very specifically. When you join with a contract, it's because an employer has given you a contract. And in all of the historical ways in which you've been able to join the union, again, with a contract through a sister union or through the EMC program, it has always been dependent on a demonstration of employability. The union has required that you demonstrate to the union, I'm a person who can get hired in this industry, and therefore I should be able to join your union. And I mean, to an extent, the first version of open access continues that trend because you need to show that you have worked professionally, that somebody has deemed you worthy. And when I say somebody, I mean an employer has deemed you worthy of being hired to work. And therefore, that is the way in which we are determining as a union your eligibility. And so 2 things. 1, a union is an institution designed to represent workers essentially against their employers, on behalf of the workers collectively with the employers on the other side of the table. So there's something that is somewhat bizarre about the idea that we of a union have handed eligibility into our workers association to the people who we negotiate with. We have given them all of the power of deciding who is worthy of joining our workers collective. And I'm glad that open access and a future of open access seemingly will be moving us away from that. But also, like Rashaan said, statistics do not lie. There is hiring bias in our industry. You are less likely to be employed in our industry if you are a member of a whole host of historically marginalized and excluded communities. And if we know that to be true, to then base eligibility to join a union on that employability that has that demonstrated hiring bias, not equitable, not inclusive, not justifiable. So That is when I say I didn't think big enough in 2016. That's what I'm talking about. That I took the existing structure and said, well, we should just make it so that if you've been a little bit less employable, it's still okay, rather than being willing to think about how to blow the system up, how to burn the system down, and say this whole thing is backwards. But ultimately, not anywhere close to big enough, and not anywhere close to actually solving the problem that was at hand. So it's a good learning experience in a lot of ways for me. What haven't we covered when it comes to joining the union?
I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah, those are the ways right now. And again, I think we are both, you're currently on the council. I am on at least one of the working groups that is examining what a future of open access will look like. So we both will be involved in some way, shape, or form in how this program moves forward. If anybody watching has ideas about ways in which the union can move forward in this direction, or if you have thoughts or opinions, or really if you've got anything you want to say to either of us, you can always contact us at wonkyweekly.com. Just go to the contact section and write to us. Let us know what you're thinking. We always want to hear from you. We love to hear from people. We love some confirmation that somebody is watching this. It's always a good thing. What else? Anything else you want to talk about today, Rashaan?
Not today, Sid. No, not today.
All right. This feels like a good place to wrap up. I'm going to let you go take care of your feet. I'm going to go take care of my finger. And I think that's it. So again, I am Sid Solomon.
Rashaan James II.
Thank you for watching this episode of Wonky Weekly, and we will see you next time. Bye.